First of all, I'd like to say I'm very happy to hear that our Democratic colleagues have agreed to allow us to come back next week and not continue on with the July 4th recess. It's important that we start work on the single greatest issue, the single most important issue facing this nation, and that's our debt and deficit issue. So a couple minutes ago, I objected to what the leadership wanted us to move to, which was an important debate on Libya, but it is not addressing what we need to address. I mean, the fact of the matter is, in the Senate this year, we've been here 6 months. We haven't passed a budget in that 6 months. As a matter of fact, we haven't passed a budget in the United States Senate for over 2 years. We've missed all of the budget deadlines. We should have passed a budget by April 15th. Appropriation bills should have been completed by June 10th. We're simply not addressing the single greatest issue facing this country and the fact that we're bankrupting America. Of the 6 bills that have been, only 6 bills have been passed in the United States Senate that have actually become law. 3 of those were cleaning up last year's business. They were continuing resolutions funding the government when what should have happened a year ago is those bills should have already been passed. And President Obama's budget that he sent over here in January was so unserious that it actually lost 0 to 97 in the United States Senate. Not a single Democrat senator voted for that budget. And we have an awful lot of work to do. Our budget deficit this year, the highest estimate I've heard is about $1.65 trillion. We've incurred over $4 trillion in just the last 3 years. And if anybody in America wants to understand why our economy is in a coma, it is exactly that. People look to Washington and they see how reckless, how out of control our spending is. As a former manufacturer, as somebody who has made investments, has created jobs, I realize when the federal government is spending so much money that it doesn't have, eventually the federal government is going to take. They're going to take in the form of higher taxes, possibly in the form of higher inflation. And the other thing that is overhanging this economy that is really preventing job creation is the overregulation. I cannot tell you how many Wisconsin business people come in to our office and is talking about that regulation or this regulation that one of these agencies are trying to impose on them. And one thing that's kind of interesting about all these regulations, or many of them, is they're not being implemented. Just like the health care law, over 3 million waivers have been granted. Why is that? I believe it's because this administration actually understands that if they implemented the health care law, if they implemented these regulations, they understand exactly the harmful effect that would have on our economy, the harmful effect that would have on job creation. So the fact of the matter is, what this administration has done, they came into office with a tough situation, no doubt about it. But their actions, the passage of the health care law, the 1,600-page Dodd-Frank financial bill, that has made job creation far harder. They've made the situation far worse. And I think Senator Rand has a few words to say.
Yes, thank you, Senator Johnson. I agree with Senator Johnson. I come down to the floor today in support of this movement. This movement is that we should be talking about what America says we should be talking about, the debt. Now, yesterday, the president went on national television and he chastised Congress. He said to Congress, and I quote, "Members of Congress need to cancel things." Well, you know what? I agree. I'm here today, though, Mr. President. Where are you? My understanding is the president's campaigning, has a fundraiser in Philadelphia tonight. I don't believe he's here tackling the nation's problems today. Well, he could send us the vice president, but I don't think the vice president's either here. Also, I think he's in Las Vegas campaigning tonight. So the thing is it's a two-way street. If he's going to go on national television and chastise us not for doing work, we're here saying we want to be working on the nation's problems. We're here saying the nation's debt is a problem. His administration has said the #1 national security threat we face is the debt. Where is the president? Campaigning. We're here, Mr. President, and we will have an offer. We don't want to raise the debt ceiling. We don't want more debt. But you know what? As Republicans, for the good of the country, we're willing to raise the debt. but only, and I repeat, only if we have significant budgetary reform. We have to balance the budget by law, force Congress to do it by changing the Constitution. It's the only way it will ever change. There is a pathology here. The pathology is that we do not have a spine. We are spineless and cannot do what it takes to cut the spending, and only we will get there if we change the Constitution. So, Mr. President, we are here. We are here, and we welcome you to come back to town in between fundraisers and talk about how we would fix this. But we would fix this by saying, yes, we will raise the debt ceiling contingent upon a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution. 75% of the public is in favor of saying you have to balance your budget. Let's come back and discuss what the American people want. And I commend Senator Johnson for leading this fight, and I think this is just the beginning. But I don't plan on saying we should go to any other subject until we've addressed the debt ceiling.
Well, Senator Rand, I totally agree with you. I believe Senator Rubio has a few words to add.
Thank you, Senator Johnson. Thank you. I too, yesterday watched the President's lecture on television. Watched it again this morning just to make sure I was well informed before I came here. My reaction is twofold. One, I was disappointed, and the other is I'm alarmed. First, I'm disappointed because America does not have a tradition of class warfare. It's never been part of our nation. In fact, one of the things that distinguishes us from the world is that Americans have never believed that you somehow have to take money away from somebody else in order to be better off. On the contrary, we've always looked to advance the cause of everyone in the belief that we can all be prosperous and in the hopes of growing our economy that way. That's the American tradition. That serves our nation well. Fortunately, you wouldn't know that from the speech yesterday. A rhetoric that, quite frankly, was deeply disappointing. The idea that if we raise taxes, as the President said, on millionaires and billionaires, raise taxes on oil companies, raise taxes on owners of private jets, that somehow is going to make a difference in America's debt in terms of having a real impact is not only misleading, I think, quite frankly, it's disappointing. It's class warfare, and it's the kind of language that you would expect from a leader of a third world country, not the President of the United States. But I'm also alarmed and worried about the speech because I think from it you can only take two things. Either the President doesn't truly understand the nature of the problem that we face, or he's decided that this is a political issue and not a policy one. I say he perhaps doesn't understand the nature of the case because, for example, he mentioned the corporate jet tax 6 different times. And yet the impact it would have is so insignificant that the White House, to this very moment, has not even been able to give an estimate of what it means in a dollar figure. Going further, by the way, it's important to note that that exact tax provision was part of the President's now infamous stimulus plan that passed in February of 2009. The bigger problem, though, is maybe the President fundamentally doesn't understand how jobs are created. Politicians don't create jobs. U.S. senators don't create jobs. Senator Johnson pointed out jobs are created by everyday people from all walks of life that start a business or expand an existing one. And our job here in government is to make it easier for them to do that, not harder. And threatening to raise taxes, threatening to wage class warfare does not accomplish that purpose. Here's what I would suggest to the President. I would suggest that we have done this before as a people in America. Things like a simpler tax code. People around here in favor of tax reform. A simpler tax code, a manageable and sane regulatory environment. And of course, a government that doesn't spend money it doesn't have. These things have worked before, and they will work again, and I urge the President to lead us in that direction.
Well, thanks, Senator Rubio. I just want to pick up on one point you made about class warfare. Certainly as a job creator myself for 31, 32 years, I know an awful lot of other entrepreneurs, and I have to point out how incredibly dispiriting it is to have leaders here in Washington attack you day in and day out, demonize you, when all you're trying to do is make a good life for yourself, your family, provide solid employment for other good Americans. So again, I really need to point out, class warfare does not work. It does nothing. It does nothing to help improve our economy. Senator Lee.
Thank you, Senator Johnson. There is no issue that is more important or more pressing for the American people than this one right now, where we've reached a point where our debt-to-GDP ratio is at about 95%. Our economy can't long endure that kind of borrowing. It has an effect that will result in an estimated loss of about 1 million jobs a year for each year that we remain above the 90% of debt-to-GDP ratio. We simply can't endure that. The American people can't endure it. We need to increase revenues. The only way we're going to increase revenues is to allow the economy to recover. That won't happen as long as we keep borrowing more and more money while doing nothing to control the underlying problem, the systemic problem that requires a structural reform. The American people, understandably, justifiably, and very correctly, are demanding that before we raise the nation's debt limit yet again, before we extend yet another credit card for the United States of America, we commit to some kind of cuts. Future borrowing requires us to make future cuts. The problem with that is the moment that that debt is actually used up, the moment it's incurred, the American people are under an obligation. But if we make a promise today that we're going to cut, let's say, $2 or $3 or $4 trillion over the next 10 or 12 or 14 or 15 years, that's a promise that we can't make. That's a promise that we can't really commit to. Because this Congress, the one that sits right now, will not be the same Congress that convenes in January of 2013 or on January of 2015 or in future years. We've got to make changes right now. And the only way that we can commit to future cuts, to future structural reforms, the only way we can bind future Congresses is by amending the U.S. Constitution to change the way we spend money, to limit spending as a percentage of GDP, and to require a supermajority to spend more than we have or to raise taxes. That's what we're demanding. We're willing to work, we're willing to come to the table on the debt limit, but we demand some kind of solution that will put us on course towards sanity. That's why we're here.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Ayotte.
I want to thank my colleagues, and I think those of you who are watching this will see that we are new senators back here in the back corner of the Senate, and I can tell you as a new member of this chamber, I'm deeply disappointed by the lack of work that we have been doing here in the United States Senate, and the majority leader has put us in a position where we haven't been focusing on the fiscal crisis that is facing our nation right now. When you look at the fact that it's been 792 days since we've had a budget, and I was so excited as a new member of the Budget Committee to roll up my sleeves and get together to put together a responsible blueprint for this country, yet unfortunately we were told by the majority leader that would be foolish to put together a responsible blueprint for this country and to do the work of the Budget Committee. One of the reasons I came to the United States Senate is, I'm tired of business as usual. I know that my freshman colleagues back here share that, and I'm the mother of 2 children. I know that the president mentioned his children yesterday, but if you care about your children and the future of this country, we owe it to our children to not continue to kick the can down the road. We should be in the United States Senate today and next week talking about how we are going to put together a blueprint that makes sure that we do not continue to borrow from countries like China, that we do not continue to enslave our children with the debt that this country is accumulating. And we know that if we do not address this, that the greatest country in the world will go bankrupt. And I, for one, want to follow through on the promise, the American promise, that we have always made to the next generation, and that is that we would leave them with a better country. And that is so threatened right now with what is happening here in Washington. That's why I share with my colleague, Senator Johnson. I do not believe that we should be addressing anything next week but spending and debt, and we have the debt ceiling vote coming up. So why aren't we rolling up our sleeves right now, Mr. President, and working on a solution with real spending reforms, putting those handcuffs on Congress that we know we need, like a balanced budget amendment, spending caps, a budget for our country so we don't continue to have this continuing resolution situation, one that reduces spending. We do not have a tax problem in this country, we have a spending problem. And we need to create a positive climate for our private sector and really do the hard work here in Washington like our families do and live within our means. So I think next week we should be doing the work that needs to be done. And Mr. President, you called on us yesterday to work. We are here working. Mr. President, the only blueprint, financial and fiscal blueprint that you have offered, your budget for 2012, did not even get one vote from a member of your party in this chamber. That budget blueprint would have added another $14 trillion to our debt. So I say to our president, we're willing to roll up our sleeves and get to work with you to avert this looming fiscal crisis. But where is your plan that's going to reduce spending and get us on a responsible fiscal path to preserve the greatest country in the world?
Thanks, Senator Ayotte. Senator Vitter.
Thank you, Senator Johnson. I'm honored to join you and all of our colleagues here to echo the same important message. Everyone knows, everyone paying attention across the country knows that our greatest challenge is out of control spending and debt. Everyone knows that we face a mounting crisis and an important deadline in terms of the debt limit. And so when are we going to face these crucial issues, the top challenges we face as a country? When are we going to face them squarely, directly, constructively here on the floor of the U.S. Senate? It's just that simple. Let's get to the important matter at hand. Let's debate in a constructive way. Let's vote on proposals to curb spending and debt. Yesterday, we stood together under Senator Johnson's leadership and said just that. And we said we're going to block any effort to go into a recess or even a pro forma session next week, July 4th recess. And we have done that. We've successfully blocked that recess. And we're going to do it because we need to roll up our sleeves. We need to go to work, not go on vacation, about this crucial challenge of spending and debt. Interestingly, President Obama, in many ways, said the same thing yesterday. And he chastised Congress and said, you need to go to work, not go on vacation, to address this crucial issue. Well, great. We've succeeded in canceling that recess. That's a first important step. But why are we continuing to try to move to every other issue under the sun except the biggest challenge our country faces? Why don't we face this issue, debate it in a constructive way? Senator Reid, why don't you put measures on the floor that directly address this issue? With that in mind, those of us who joined together yesterday to block our July 4th recess have written Senator Reid a letter today. And I think it summarizes our point and our position very clearly, so I'll read it. It's not long. Dear Leader Reid, yesterday we came together to make it clear that we believe the Senate should not go on vacation while our country goes bankrupt. And we vowed to block any recess or pro forma session next week. We're glad you have accepted that reality. But let's not be in session just to try and fool the American people into thinking the Senate is working on the nation's fiscal crisis. Let's actually begin a constructive debate on the biggest challenge our country faces, spending and debt. With that goal, we write to ask a few simple, fundamental questions. When will you put serious bills on the floor to directly address spending and debt? The Budget Act of 1974 requires the Senate Budget Committee to mark up a budget by April 15th. And tomorrow will mark the 793rd day since the Democratic-led Senate has passed a budget and the 11th week since missing that deadline this year. When will the Budget Committee meet to mark up a budget proposal, and when will you put such a proposal on the floor? The American people want us to enact meaningful, effective spending caps. When will you put a spending cap bill on the Senate floor? We clearly need the enforced discipline of a balanced budget constitutional amendment. This measure failed by a single vote last time it was debated on the floor of the U.S. Senate. When will you put a balanced budget amendment on the Senate floor? Senator Reid, we await your response and your leadership. And so again, Mr. President, to summarize, we banded together yesterday and said, as the country goes bankrupt, we shouldn't go on vacation. We're going to block any recess, any pro forma session next week, and we did. But we did it to turn to this challenge, to debate spending and debt in a constructive way, to have votes on that, not to continue to avoid the issue and turn to every other issue under the sun. And so through the chair, I'd again ask Senator Reid, why don't we turn to this most important challenge of our country? Please put serious bills on the Senate floor that directly address spending and debt. Let's get on with the people's work.
Thank you, Senator Vitter. Senator Sessions.
Thank you, Senator Johnson, and thank you for your leadership on this issue. As the ranking Republican on the Budget Committee, I share my colleagues' disappointment that we have not functioned. It's good to see Senator Ayotte and Senator Johnson, who are members of that committee. We worked hard to get prepared some weeks ago on the assumption that the United States Senate would meet its statutorily required duty, and that is to produce a budget. I'm holding up Title II, United States Code, Section 632, and it's the Budget Act. And it requires that the Congress annually produce a budget. We've gone now 792 days, I guess, without a budget. It's the first line of the act is on or before April 15th of each year, Congress shall complete action on the concurrent resolution on the budget for the fiscal year beginning October 1st for the next fiscal year. Well, we haven't done that. It also said that we should meet by April 1st. Senator Conrad, our budget chairman, our Democratic chairman, an able, experienced chairman, was prepared to go forward. It's pretty clear to me that the majority leader decided that we shouldn't have a budget process. Last year, the Budget Committee produced a budget out of committee, but the majority leader failed to bring it up for vote in the floor. And as the leader, he has the power generally to control that fact and was able to do so. This year, he said it would be foolish to have a budget, and basically we haven't even met in committee to have a budget. So we're facing the most serious systemic debt crisis in our nation's history. The numbers are so serious, and our path is so unacceptable that it is clearly the #1 issue of our time. The chairman of President Obama's Debt Commission gave us a written statement to the Budget Committee, said this nation has never faced a more predictable economic crisis. When asked when, Erskine Bowles, President Clinton's chief of staff, said it could be 2 years, a little before, a little after. So I guess what I'm saying is that these individuals, particularly the ones that just finished a campaign, traveled all over their state, talked to hundreds of thousands, millions of people in their state, got a feel for it. They are bringing new vitality and new insight into what's happening. And what's happening is nothing. 6 months have gone by, and we've not had any hearings. We've had not any votes on the floor. We haven't seen any legislation. So I think that this is an unacceptable method. I think it undermines the classic constitutional duty of Congress to appropriate money, deal with taxes. It's our responsibility, and we have to ultimately be responsible for it. But have you observed mayors who say, I'm not going to present a budget to city council, I'm going to let them decide? Do you see governors not present budgets to the state legislatures and then fight for what they believe in? Look what's happening with Governor Christie, Governor Cuomo in New York, Governor Brown in California, Governor Bentley in Alabama. It really helps to have that one single person elected to represent everybody provide some impetus. And it's astounding to me that we haven't seen that from the majority leader in the Senate and from the president. He submitted a budget but then backed away from it, and it went down 97-0 in the floor just a few weeks ago, but it was never seriously considered. So what is we going to do? We're heading to a time where we may be asked within a few hours to vote on a monumental multi-trillion-dollar deal to raise the debt limit of the United States, and what will be in it? Will we really be changing the trajectory of our nation, or will it be business as usual? We're not going to have time to review it. That should be on the floor now. People should be standing up and casting votes right now. How much taxes do you want to increase? Do you? Which ones? How much do you want to cut? Sessions? Where? Let's have the vote out here. That's what we should be doing. I think it'll help the American people understand how serious our fix is, what it's going to take to get out of it. It's much more serious, and our problem is greater than most people realize. So I thank my colleagues for their good comments and the enthusiasm they've brought and the passion they brought to this critical issue.
Well, thank you, Senator Sessions. I will point out that business as usual here in Washington is bankrupting America. Senator DeMint.
Thank you, Senator Johnson. I'm glad our Republican freshmen did not get the memo that they were supposed to be seen but not heard. It's really exciting for this old, dusty establishment when the people who just walked in the door are the ones who are leading it, and so I thank all of the freshmen who are sitting here. Washington is addicted to spending, and the addict-in-chief is President Obama. He's promised many times to quit spending, to live within our means, but he keeps falling off the wagon. And now for the fourth time since he's been president, he's asking Congress to refill the bottle so that he can keep spending and keep borrowing and keep increasing America's debt. Members of Congress, the Senate, often brag about the fact that we have the power of the purse. Part of that power is to pass laws to limit how much the administration can borrow. It's been a tradition. But both parties over the years have consistently blown through that legal debt limit and increased it whenever we wanted another drink. The debt limit is supposed to be a stop sign to stop the administration from spending more than we can afford as a nation. Instead, they've turned it into a green light where we can just speed through and continue to pour more and more debt onto our children. But now we've gone from it being just a wink and a nod where we brag about how much bacon we take home to we're at the point where we could seriously lose our nation. I think Americans sense that everywhere. Congressmen and politicians constantly exaggerate and cry wolf. But I think there's a sense all across America that goes beyond partisanship to real worry. That's what I hear everywhere I go. People somehow intuitively know that if we have debt almost the size of our economy and projecting to even double that over the next 10 years, that what they see on TV in Greece and around the world of countries literally coming unglued could very well happen much quicker than we think here in the United States. We've got over $14 trillion in debt. We know the president's not serious about quitting this spending binge because the budget he sent us practically doubles that. And as we've gone through these last few months of talking about raising the debt limit once again, we have not gotten one proposal from the president to deal with this issue. He's played dozens of rounds of golf and had many, many fundraisers around the country, but he has been AWOL on this issue. So not only has he added over $3 trillion of debt since he became president, he's been missing in action when it comes to actually dealing with it. And his condescending speech yesterday that told Congress to solve the problem ignored the fact that he was elected as president to lead. And yet he's not even following when it comes to this issue. We do have a spending addiction, and the only way that we're going to stop this and keep our country from going over the cliff is if we have a constitutional requirement that we have to stop spending more than we're borrowing. Now, outside of Washington, that doesn't sound like an extraordinary thing to say, but here, last week, one of the Democrat senators called me extreme for suggesting that we needed to balance our budget. American families have to do it, businesses have to do it, 49 states have to do it, and sometimes it's painful, but we don't have to do it here. And the reason we have an unlimited government is that we have unlimited spending here in Congress. We're at a point where we have to make a decision. We've obligated ourselves to borrow more money. We really don't have a good choice at this point. But if we're going to give the President more money to spend to meet obligations that he's already made, we have to make sure that this is the end of this spending addiction. And the only way for that to happen is if we in Congress give the people of the United States and the 50 states the opportunity to decide for themselves if they want their federal government to have a balanced budget. And that's what our condition is. We'll help the President deal with this debt ceiling, but he is going to have to agree with us, and so will the Democrat Party, that we're going to send to the states a balanced budget amendment that the states can ratify. And 5 years after they ratify it, this federal government must be in balance. If we can't do that, if we can't make that commitment to the American people that we're going to stop this addiction, stop bankrupting our country, then we're going to have to go through the pain that we've caused ourselves along with this President when we don't raise that debt limit. We need the help of Americans today because the people in Congress do not have the willpower to do what I just said. We need millions of Americans to call us and email us and tell the President and tell members of Congress that this debt limit should not be raised again ever unless we permanently solve this problem for the American people.
The Senator has used the 30 minutes of the colloquy.
I ask unanimous consent for 2 more minutes.
Seeing here no objection, 2 minutes is granted.
This is very little to ask this Congress to do, to agree within the next 6 or 8 years to do the hard work to balance our budget in return for giving the President more authority to borrow more money. We owe it to the American people to let them decide for themselves. Let the states ratify it. This is a huge decision, and all we're asking our Democrat colleagues to do is to let America decide if we should have a balanced budget. Let America decide if it's really a radical, extreme idea that we live within our means and stop spending more than we're bringing in. I know how America is going to answer that question, and that's why I want to give them the chance to answer it. Mr. President, you've got the money you need to meet our obligations, but once and for all, we need to mean what we say and stop spending this country into bankruptcy. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield back.
Thank you, Senator Mint, for your leadership on this issue. It is the most important issue facing this nation. I want to thank my colleagues for joining me here for the leadership they've shown as well. So with that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.